Dear friends and colleagues, welcome to the 5th webinar of the 8th Summer School on Human Rights, Ensuring Security of Worship Places and Religious Communities, which is going to discuss the need for training on security of the worship places and action plans for the protection of the worship places. From the policy point of view, European Commission has developed action plan on the protection of the public spaces in 2017 due to terrorist attacks that show targeting of public spaces, exploiting the vulnerabilities of these so-called soft targets that result from their open nature and public character. This concerned pedestrian space, tourist sites, transport hubs, shopping malls, places of worship, outdoor markets, concert halls, and city squares, as seen in attacks in, for example, Barcelona, Berlin, Brussels, London, Manchester, Nice, and Stockholm. In this regard, the European Commission has also organized operators forum meetings for the protection of the public spaces. And for the discussion of the experts coming from the EU member states, they also have invited relevant stakeholders, including religious communities. On the other hand, another international organization like the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, has developed the OSCE guidelines on freedom of religion or belief and security in 2019, designed to clarify the interrelationship between freedom of religion or belief and security in light of the OSCE comprehensive framework for peace and security, and discuss the nature, the status, and scope of freedom of religion or belief, which is in line with the OSCE commitments and international and regional standards, which were addressed to the policy makers in order to ensure that law, policies, and strategies in this area are in line with universal human rights. So the Conference of European Churches was been part of both of these processes. And we are very pleased that in this webinar, we have invited Andrea Woltmer, who was directly involved in the process of developing the EU Action Plan on Protection of the Public Spaces in 2017, to tell us more about the document, how it came into being. So Andrea is recently working again in the German Ministry of Interior in Low Saxony in Hanover, and she is a lawyer and police officer working in international police cooperation. So Andrea, the past 4 years, was working for the European Commission, DG Home, in the Counter-Terrorist Unit, and her task was to coordinate the implementation of the EU Action Plan to support the protection of the public spaces. Andrea, we are very pleased that you are there today with us, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Elisabetta. Yes, so I wish you all a good day from my side, and many thanks again, Elisabetta, many thanks, Vanessa, and the whole team behind the Summer School on Human Rights. And I thank you a lot for organizing this Summer School and for inviting me to speak about the EU policy framework on the protection of public spaces. Elisabetta has already briefly introduced me. Maybe a couple of more words. As Elisabetta has said, I started working for the European Commission in 2017 as a so-called seconded national expert from the German police. And my task there was, it started in 2017 with drafting the action plan to support the protection of public spaces. And the years after that, it was about the implementation of the action plan. So, and now my secondment to the Commission has come to an end, but still I will stay involved in the work on the protection of public spaces as one of the 2 policy group members, which is a forum established for the implementation of this work area from the German side. So that is why I'm still quite well placed to talk about this, despite that I'm back from the Commission and now in Germany again. So in my presentation, I first want to give you an overview of the policy framework around this topic. On the one hand side on public spaces in general, and on the other hand side with a special focus on the protection of places of worship. And so I think we can start. And please go to the next slide. Thank you. So on this slide, I have mentioned the most important facts about the action plan. And as Elisabetta has already rightfully stated, all public spaces of different nature have been subject to attacks. And yeah, these are so-called soft targets in contrast to hard targets, and they are especially attractive to terrorist attackers due to their open nature and their public character. And of course, we want public spaces and especially places of worship to be open and welcoming. So there always needs to be a balance between protecting these spaces and not disrupting their open and welcoming nature. So you might ask, which stake does the Commission have in this area? Because, of course, protection and security are first and foremost responsibilities and tasks for the member states. It's a national competency, especially of law enforcement. So this is also why the action plan is called Action Plan to Support the Protection of Public Spaces. So the Commission is a network partner and a facilitator and supports member states and also other stakeholders in different ways that I have listed here numerically. So the action plan serves to implement actions to foster the exchange of best practice, to establish and facilitate networks, and to provide guidance material. And I will give you a few examples for this in the next slides. To involve stakeholders in a very wide way, including local actors, the private sector, and of course also NGOs, religious associations. So basically, this is an area of very wide work. And also, last but not least, dedicated funding. The action plan is accompanied by a Commission staff working document on good practices to support the protection of public spaces. And here we have gathered a number of practices that always have been subject to the discussions in the different fora that we have set up. And you can find both the action plan and the Commission staff working document if you follow the link. And of course, I am willing that this presentation is shared with the audience today. Just briefly, maybe on the staff working document, this has different sections. One section focuses on assessment and planning, one on awareness and training, one on physical protection, and one on cooperation. So these are different areas that have always been subject of discussion in the groups that we have established on the EU level. Please go to the next slide. Just very briefly, I won't go into the details here. This is the latest policy document that has been published in this area, the EU Counter-Terrorism Agenda. It was published last December, following the attacks in autumn that we have seen in Europe, namely in Vienna, in the city center, and especially relevant for the topic that we're talking about, the attack on the church Notre Dame de Nice, where we have seen a stabbing. So basically this document had been foreseen for mid of this year, actually, and it was then fast-tracked and already published in December last year because of the urgency that we have seen with the attacks. The Counter-Terrorism Agenda has 4 different dimensions, as you can see here. It's about anticipation of threats, prevention, and this is basically working on to counter radicalization and to work together with cities on this, protection and response. And I will focus here on the protection side. So if you go to the next slide, please. Under the action plan, we have established different platforms and fora for the exchange of best practice, lessons learned, and also networking between member states and between stakeholders within member states. The umbrella is the EU Forum on the Protection of Public Spaces, and one very important group that Elisabetta has already mentioned is the EU Operators Forum. In this Operators Forum, we bring together the policymakers from EU member states. As I have said, I will remain a member of this group from the German side, and different operators of public spaces. On the one hand side from the private sector, so for instance, operators or umbrella organizations of shopping malls, the hospitality sector and so forth, but also religious associations. So the different umbrella organizations of religious associations are part of this operators forum under the umbrella of the EU Forum on the Protection of Public Spaces. Then another important area of work is the work that we have with cities. At the moment, this is done through the Urban Partnership on Security in Public Spaces, which is an initiative under the Urban Agenda by our partner directorate, the DG Regio. And yeah, with the arrows below, you see different dimensions that I have mentioned already, public-private cooperation, the role of regional and local public authorities, and the law enforcement community. And in the next slide, please. You see, just very briefly, just for your information, another work strand that we have. These are the EU-funded law enforcement networks. And I won't go into the details here, but just for your knowledge, this is one of the work strands that we have on the protection of public spaces, that we foster the exchange and the cooperation between different police forces with different tasks. Next slide, please. Another example of a work strand that we have is to promote security by design solutions. And I do think that this is also very relevant for religious associations. So we are working at the moment on a virtual architectural book on urban design. It will be published towards the end of this year or beginning of next year. And this will be a very practical guide on what kind of physical protection measures there are available and can be used. And a main target group are local communities, but I do think that this could also be very useful for religious associations as well. Next slide, please. This is an overview of further guidance that we have published on different topics, mainly with our cooperation partner, the Joint Research Center. It's a center by the Commission, which employs a number of scientific experts who are working in this field. In the past, different trainings and workshops have taken place. And since the start of the pandemic, we have a virtual format, the EU Digital Autumn School for the Protection of Public Spaces. This will be held in September and October of this year. Again, it has taken place for the first time last year. And on the very last slide, where we don't have to go to at the moment, but On the very last slide, I have put a link where you can find further information and, for instance, on a newsletter and on this digital autumn school. Now, next slide, please. Yes, one very practical area of work is the work on risk assessments and preparedness, the so-called EU Protective Security Advisors Program. And this program offers a standardized methodology for risk assessment and the assessment of vulnerabilities of sites, which is called the Vulnerability Assessment Checklist. And a pool of experts have been trained, the EU Protective Security Advisory Teams, which are available on demand to assess vulnerabilities of specific public spaces. So in the past, some assessments already have been ongoing also on religious sites, and these teams are available on request. And in this framework, also a quick guide on the protection of places of worship has been developed. Next slide, please. Yeah, looking at the time, I won't go too much into the details, but here you can see different areas and different aspects of vulnerability assessments, just that you have an idea what this is about. It is about, I will only pick one or two. It's about how are the approach routes, for instance, also for emergency services. So is the site accessible? How is, which safeguards or access controls are there? Are there parking facilities and so forth? So all these are aspects that you can consider and take into consideration for vulnerability assessments. Next slide, please. The cooperation with faith associations is a very, very important one for us. And on this slide, you will, of course, recognize a number of the logos that I have put. First of the Conference of European Churches, so yourself, and the Security and Crisis Center of the European Jewish Congress, where we have Ophir as a representative, Faith Matters, and that we have heard the European Buddhist Union, and there are also further associations. So this is just these are just examples that we have picked, and actually 2 years ago this work has intensified, and since the places of worship have been the target of attacks already a number of times. This is also why, on the next slide, please, we have made available funding for projects in this area. And in general, as we have seen already under the action plan, one of the pillars is funding for projects for better cooperation and increased knowledge. And the call that was published last year had the priority to focus on the protection of places of worship. 5 projects are funded, and of one we have already heard this morning, which is the SASKI project. And I won't go into the details here because Ophir will speak just after me. If you go to the next slide, please. Yes, there is the EU funding and tenders portal. So this is just for your information. This is the place where calls for proposals are always published. I have put the link in the lower part of this slide. So at the moment, you only see the expired calls for proposals. Why is this? Because the annual work program for this year has yet to be adopted, and after this, calls for proposals will be published. Since the call on the protection of public spaces had places of worship as a priority last year, it will not be the direct priority again this year, but in the future, but it's not excluded to also hand in project proposals on this. It always depends how the call is formulated. I cannot give you any further details on this because this will happen after the summer break. But so that you know, this is the place where calls for proposals are published. Next slide, please. This is just a good practice example of another association, Faith Associates. They have been working mainly in the UK so far, but they are also involved in a further project, and this is just an example that they have published on security tips that you can implement for mosque security. Next slide, please. So here you have an overview of the projects that have been chosen under last year's call and that are starting now or have already started. As I have said, on SASCI, I won't focus here much because Ophir will do that. And there are 4 more projects, and we have already made sure that the project coordinators know each other. We have held a conference a few months back to give an overview of these projects. And looking at the time, I will just mention a few keywords of these projects. The project on protection and security for places of worship is a project that focuses on different aspects, but mainly they have a very innovative approach by visual storytelling of mainly of victims of terrorist attacks. Then we have the Prosperous project and the Protector and the SOAR project, and all these bring together a number of different stakeholders. Protector, for instance, aims at establishing a comprehensive protection system by establishing a wide range of tools for the prevention, protection, deterrence, and response of various types of attacks. Then the SOAR project, which stands for Strengthening the Security and Resilience of At-Risk Religious Sites and Communities, also involves different religious associations, and it has a main focus on security by design. So again, looking at the time, I will go to the next slide, which is just a rough, and maybe also to mention on the project. So far as I've seen, I've only found the website of the SOAR project, but I guess the websites of the other projects are under development. So, and as I have said, they are just starting. So keep an eye open for that. Another area of work of the Counterterrorism Unit, just very briefly for your knowledge, is the focus on new technologies in different regards. For instance, to counter the misuse of drones, which can target public spaces, a legislative initiative on artificial intelligence, and this is a broader initiative, not only by DG Home, but of different DGs. Then there is a technical working group to improve the efficacy of threat detection equipment. And there's work ongoing on the threats coming from chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear risks. So, and with this, I want to come to the last slide, the possibility for questions and answers, but I do think that we do that at the end of the panel session. And here I have also put 2 links where you can find further information and also the possibility to establish contact. And yeah, by this, I would like to close my presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andrea, for a very clear presentation to our audience. And as Conference of European Churches, we are very pleased to be part of the SASCE project, which falls basically into the funding of the internal security and fund police, which is there to help implementation of the EU action plan on the protection of the public spaces. And this Summer School for Human Rights this year is actually within this project called for Safer and Stronger Communities in Europe. And I will turn now to our next speaker, to the leading applicant of SASCE project, Dr. Ofir Revach, who is CEO of the European Jewish Congress Security and Crisis Center. So SAC actually has a main headquarters in Brussels, and it's very active in hundreds of communities all over Europe to enhance security and civil resilience, counter-terrorism, violent extremism, and develop community-based security cooperation with law enforcement, intelligence, and governments. So FIR has 30 years extensive experience in the field, working in the number of senior positions in the field of security and crisis management. And he has studied political science, and for the whole time he has been a great support in helping us and bringing us all together into this project. So, Ofir, the floor is yours.
First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Elisabetta and Vanessa, for all KK team for organizing the summer school. It's really very important and very interesting conference. It's a good opportunity also to say thank you to Andrea, for all your support, and good luck in your new challenge in Hanover. This is our second meeting today. In the first one, we presented the guide for law enforcement. The guide was prepared by the FET Association. And now we are going to speak about the other topics about training. Before I start to speak and start with the presentation, I would like to mention, I already said in the morning, but I will mention that again, that since 2015, we can see a dramatic change in the threat and in the security. We can see the first change is mainly all the attackers are local citizens, and mainly nearly all the targets were a public place and places of worships. And I believe, together also with my other partner for SASCE project, that by implementing SASCE project, we can improve dramatically the security in and outside the place of worships. Vanessa, please, the next slide. It's not a security lesson, but I'm going to make it briefly what we are going to make in our training. And when I speak about our training, it's training for community leadership, staff, guards, and community members. So the first, I would like to speak about the circle of security. So the first part of that is the intelligence. And we are going to focus in our work in our project on the OSIM. I will speak later about it. The second part is the security, the prevention. And here we are going to deal and to work with the guards, community leaders. And we are going to speak about also and to check the physical and technical means in the building and the procedure. The third part, and maybe today is the most important thing, is the community members, and we are going to see how we can improve the security awareness of our community members. And the last thing is the crisis management. Our main goal is to prevent any kind of problem, but if we didn't manage, so we are going to be ready to handle any kind of crisis. Vanessa, please. The first part, like I mentioned, is intelligence. Of course, we are not going to make intelligence. We are going to work only on open source intelligence. We already start, I think 1 month ago, we start to produce our first reports from all the four organizations. And this report we are sharing with all our partner and the European organization, law enforcement, and our community leaders. And in the future, it will be also in our website. The idea is to see only from open source intelligence, to see what happened, to see a trend, to see what's happened in the continent, which country is more, we see the more dangerous, maybe the threat is higher than the other country, and how we can support those countries, and to take case study and to take case study who happen in one of the organization, to see how we can study and we can improve for other organizations. And the law enforcement, we talk in the morning about the law enforcement, that today the most important thing maybe is to be in contact and to work together and to have a good cooperation with the law enforcement. And the law enforcement are responsible to protect us, to protect all the citizens, and also to see how they can share with us if they have a special information or something that they think maybe it's a threat for our buildings, or maybe it's a threat for our leaders or community members. Vanessa, please. Next slide. The second part is, like I mentioned before, our main goal is to prevent any kind of attack against our building, against our leaders, and against our community members. And like I mentioned before, we saw in the last year a lot of attack against our buildings, but also against our community members, people who are carrying a religious motive like a kippah or Magen David or cross or other things. If they are also attacked, in the last years. We are going to focus in our training first in the guards. But if we saw before, a few years ago, that it was enough to prepare and to teach and to work only with the guards, now because the threat changed, and now, like I said before, we can see attacks also in the soft target. It's very important for us also to train the community leaders, the staff members, and the community members, and how we are going to do it, and we'll speak about it later. The basic tools. We are going to speak about the basic tools in security in our training. Of course, there's a huge difference between the building, the way that they are protecting. Of course, the Jewish building, the security is much more higher than the others. But our goal is to see how we can bring and teach basic tools to all the four FET organizations. The other things is to see a physical and a technical means. Of course, our goal is not now to start to build a bunker or to start to build to make our place of worship as a shelter. It's not the goal, it's not the idea, but to see something, a basic thing, to see a basic things. Like I say in the morning, and it's very important me to mention that again, the goal is that the community will have a normal life, that the people will feel secure and will feel free to come to the mosque, to the church, to the synagogue, and they will send the children to the school. This is our main goal, and the security is the means. The goal of the security, the objective is to help to have a normal life, and we are going here to teach about the basic thing, not something we are going to change the life of our believers. And the last thing, and maybe one of the important thing, is the procedure, to see how we can build and how we can have a procedure to enter to our buildings. Vanessa, please, next slide. We prepare, I'm not going to speak about it, I already talked in the morning about the guide for law enforcement, but here I would like to mention 2 guides that we prepare. Thanks to the DG Home, I would like to say the DG Home prepare the guides, prepare the main guides, our colleague Rad from DG Home, and I would like to thank him again for preparing a really professional and very good and important guides. And we took the guides and we made a little change, a little adaptation to our needs. And we prepare 2 guides. One guide is for the community leader and for staff, and also for security, for guards. And this is, of course, is the long one, is with much more details. And we are going to work with those people, leaders, staff, and security on this guide. The guide is speaking about the routine, and is speaking, of course, about emergency and how to prepare a big event, like in a holiday or weekend or special event, etc. And the other guide is going to be for the community members. Of course, it's a much shorter and with much less details, but we took what is relevant for the community members. And our goal is to work with all those in all the level, from the community leaders until the community members. The guide we translate now we are translating the guides in a 14 language, like you see in the slide. And our goal is going to, all of them are going to be ready in the end of August. In the end of August, we are going to have a 3 days training in Brussels for all the 4 organizations from SASKI project. And in this date, we are going to speak about the guide, to speak how we are going to deliver the training, how we are going to deliver also the guides to the relevant people, to the relevant communities. Vanessa, please. Like I said before, until now I talk mainly about the security, the guards, the community leaders, and what we saw in the last years, that mainly most of the attack happen in the public place. It means against everybody, and this is in one thing. So everyone today is a target. Can be in the street, can be in the shop, can be in the mall, can be in the bus station, can be everywhere. And in another way, in another thing that I mentioned before also, that nearly all the attackers were local citizens. It means it's very important. It can be maybe your neighbor, can be your teacher, can be your friend, can be anyone that from your circle of life. And it's very important to understand that it's we must increase the security awareness in case somebody sees something or somebody sees something strange, to go and to report immediately to the local authority. I would like to give a little example. 2 years ago, we saw attack in Barcelona, in the Ramla, and after we understood that 3 people from Morocco rented a house in a little village. They managed to buy 120 gas balloons, and after the attack, when the police came to found the house, the first question they asked, how the neighbor saw that something is wrong with those people. They understood there's something suspicious with those people, but nobody even thought to go to the police and to tell them, look, there's something very strange here. By telling them, maybe they could prevent the attack. So our goal is to see how we can increase the security awareness. Our goal is to see how we can deliver the message in the place of worships, of course, also in the school, and in the other kind of media, social media, in our website, or other way that we can deliver the message. For that, we prepare 10 videos that we already translate to a 6 language, like you can see in the slide. Anyway, the video, I'm not going to show you now all the video, it's not the idea, but during the training, we are going to see how we can share with the people all the 10 video. The 10 video are in suspicious object, active shooter, data protection, car remind, suspicious behavior, kidnapping, hate crime, CPR, fake ID on the web, radicalization. And now I would like, in all the videos we prepare with a special team, with a psychologist, teacher, people that are not also with security, but our goal was that it's not going to be something frightening, something that will impose the fear. It's good. All the videos are very nicely, nice color, nice music, and now we are going to see one example from the video is active shooter.
Hi there, it's me, Nathan, your private security awareness advisor. Let me introduce you to Sandra. Where is she? Oh, here she is, eating her daily lunch at the canteen when... Hold on a second. Did you notice? No, not the sandwich. I'm talking about this. Active shooters are unpredictable threats acting in both private and public places to commit armed attacks. In such situations, remember these 3 words: run, hide, report. So, now Sandra, run as fast as you can towards the nearest exit. If the exit is too far or you cannot escape, hide somewhere. If possible, lock the door and block the access. Always set your mobile phone on silent mode and report it to the authorities by calling 112.
Alright, we'll arrive as fast as possible.
Okay, Sandra, every effort has been made to ensure your safety. Just remember this: run, hide, report. And do not forget, together we are safer.
Like I said before, our main goal is to prevent not only a terror attack, also terror attack. Can be everything, can be electricity challenge in the building or other car accident or other things that we can prevent. But in case that we don't manage to prevent, or it's natural disaster like now what happened now in Germany, that it's nobody could think or prepare or prevent this challenge. So for that, we are going to prepare our community leaders and staff to prepare and how to handle a crisis management. So we prepare a video. Of course, we are not going to give the lecture, but we prepare some video that we are going to show it in our training, and we are going to work with the people in our training and basic. And this video can be a very good example for all of us now.
The concept of crisis is part of our daily vocabulary. We hear it regularly in the media. But what is a crisis? Its definition is simple. A crisis is any event that is going or is expected to lead to an unstable and dangerous situation affecting an individual, group, community, or the whole society. It has 4 specific characteristics. A crisis threatens essential assets such as people, the environment, or the economy. It is accompanied by considerable uncertainty. It cannot be contained or resolved without the use of extraordinary measures. And finally, we have little time to respond. Crisis management specialist Jonathan Bernstein classifies them according to their duration. There are creeping crises, which are predicted by a series of events that decision makers do not consider as part of a pattern. The coronavirus, for example. Slow burn crises, on the other hand, have a kind of forewarning before the situation ends up creating real damage. This is the case of global warming. And then, of course, there are the sudden crises where the damage has already occurred and will get worse the longer we delay action. 9/11 is a perfect illustration of this. Now that we know the types of crises, let's see how we deal with them. This is called crisis management, the process by which an organization deals with a disruptive and unexpected event that threatens to harm the organization and its stakeholders. When faced with a crisis, our main objective will be to reduce its impact, or to protect an organization or a community. This is a continuous process, starting with preparing for various crisis scenarios, then ensuring a rapid and appropriate response while maintaining clear communication lines. We will also need to agree on the rules for exiting the crisis, ensuring a rapid return to normal operations, and finally assessing hazards and vulnerabilities to mitigate risks and organizing appropriate education. Of course, the primary objective of this process is always to save human lives and go back to normal as soon as we can. Now that those two concepts are clear, let's move on to practice. A crisis is actually a cycle that we divide into 3 phases: the pre-crisis phase, the response phase, and the post-crisis phase. In the first phase, the crisis has not yet occurred, so we are focusing on prevention and preparation. In other words, we concentrate on reducing all known risks that are likely to escalate into a real crisis. We also focus on preparing for the various crisis scenarios that could affect the organization or the community, whatever it may be. But do not forget that it is sometimes impossible to predict or to prevent a crisis. The only thing we have total control over is how we react when a crisis occurs. This reaction is possible thanks to the 2 following management areas. The Crisis Management Plan. Its goal is to reduce the response time by assigning certain tasks in advance. It also collects certain information and uses it as a general and quick reference in case of a crisis. Several elements are part of this plan, such as procedures, responsibilities, and more generally, any document that facilitates its implementation. The Crisis Management Team, whose composition varies widely depending on the organization or community involved, but should generally include the following 2 groups: the decision-making group and the professional groups coming from a wide variety of fields. The best results are found by physically bringing these 2 groups together. Now, how do we evaluate their efficiency? Simply through regular exercises, both tabletop and in the field. If gaps are exposed during the process, they should be addressed, and if needed, corrective measures should be carried out and implemented. The next phase is called the response phase, in which management must react. Public relations play here a crucial role in distributing information. The crisis has now occurred, and the very first step is to recognize it. We must then mobilize the crisis management team and execute the crisis management plan. The response must also follow a quite simple principle: QAC. Quick. Managers need to quickly communicate their narrative. If they don't, others will do it, and perhaps with incorrect information. Accurate. Providing accurate information is essential for understanding the crisis and its impact on the public or the community. Consistent. A consistent message is important, especially when several people are assigned as spokespersons. Therefore, they must always speak with one voice. Beyond this principle, never forget that the top priority is always to save lives. Any other concerns, such as financial or reputation consequences, cannot be considered until public safety is assured. As for potential victims, it is always important to communicate with them, especially when there are serious injuries or deaths. In this case, in addition to the human aspect, expressions of sympathy and concern help to reduce reputation damage and potential financial losses due to this crisis. We are finally getting to the last phase, the post-crisis phase. The crisis has now passed and is no longer the central focus. Efforts are therefore concentrated on restoring normal operations. However, some follow-up communications and important actions will be necessary, and the lessons learned should help to improve the preparation and prevention of future crises. Act now. Be proactive, not reactive. Organize your local community-based crisis management team.
Thank you, Vanessa. I would like to mention before ending that all what we prepare for the SASCI project, what you saw only part of what we prepared, the videos, the guides, the brochure, and other things we prepared. It's thanks to the European Commission and the fund they gave us. I would like to mention another thing, that in the end of August, we are going to have a 3 days training. In this training for all the SASCI partner, and we are going to have to train the trainer. We are going to see how we can prepare the trainer, and then after that, I hope until this time also all the material will be ready, and then we will go to our communities. All what I present now, we are going. This is exactly the training that we are going to do and to work with all the people I mentioned before, from the leaders until the community members. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ophir, for this extensive presentation and for showing us the material that we have developed so far, like in the form of video presentations, as well as paper material, which is basically the guide on the protection of the worship places for religious leaders and staff, as well as for the worshippers. So this project would not be possible without the funding of European Commission. And we are very pleased that actually we could contribute to the development of this project for the safety of all our communities in Europe. So in the second part of this webinar, we are going to turn from Europe to the OSCE, to the expertise coming from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and Transatlantic Cooperation, which exists between European Union and the United States. And in this regard, I would like to invite our next speaker, and that is Dr. Mattia Ferrero. So Mattia has participated in the process of developing of the OSCE Guide on Religious Freedom and Security on behalf of the Holy See, Vatican, and he has graduated summa cum laude in law from Catholic University of the Sacred Heart of Milan, and got his PhD in canon and ecclesiastical law from the same university, where he is currently teaching assistant in ecclesiastical law. He is admitted to the Milan Bar Association and member of the Human Rights Commission. He works in the law firm as a partner, and since 2017 he serves as national point of contact on hate crime for the permanent mission of the Holy See to the OSCE. And he's also vice president of the Union of Italian Catholic Jurists. So, dear Mattia, I would kindly invite you to present your expertise and explain us a little bit how was the process that OSCE organized on religious freedom and security, because they have also tackled this issue within the framework of the 15/8 member states. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Thank you, Elisabetta. And the outset, I wish to reiterate my thanking to the Conference of European Church for organizing the summer school, as well as for inviting me to speak about the security of worship places, in particular within the context of the OSCE. I wish to thank also the other panelists for their thought-provoking and very insightful presentations. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is an international governmental organization with 57 participating states, the Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals, plus Turkey, Central Asian former Soviet republics, Mongolia, and in North America, the USA and Canada. Its origins date back to the Cold War in the 70s, although the process started well before, and it was conceived as a political forum for a dialogue between the two blocs then existing, but with a role given also to neutral and non-aligned states thanks to a decision-making process based on consensus rule. Since the very beginning, the OSCE, then called CSE, Conference for Security and Cooperation in Europe, adopted a comprehensive approach to security, considering the respect for human rights and namely of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief as, and I quote from the 7th principle of Helsinki Decalogue, an essential factor for the peace, justice, and well-being necessary to ensure the development of friendly relations and cooperation among themselves as among all states. Thus, we see that in the comprehensive approach to security of the OSCE, there is an explicit structural link between freedom of religion or belief on the one hand and security on the other hand, which heightens awareness of freedom of religion or belief not only as a universal human right to be protected for itself, but also as a fundamental factor for the creation of security within and between the participating states. Freedom of religion or belief was reaffirmed and detailed in many other subsequent OSCE documents. Among many, in 1989 Vienna Final Document, the participating states committed themselves to respect the right of religious communities to establish and maintain freely accessible places of worship or assembly. More recently, in 2013, Ministerial Council Decision 313, the participating states committed themselves to endeavor to prevent and protect against attacks directed at persons or groups based on thought, conscience, religion, or belief, as well as to adopt policies to promote respect and protection for places of worship and religious sites, religious monuments, cemeteries, and shrines against vandalism and destruction. In the light of above, we may say, as Pope Francis did in his last address to the diplomatic corps, that, and I quote, "the protection of places of worship is a direct consequence of the defense of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion," end quote. In this perspective, states are under a primary responsibility and positive obligation to prevent and protect religious communities from attacks, also if perpetrated from private actors. It is not satisfactory that state does not commit violence itself, but every time an attack occurs, we should ask whether the state has done its best to prevent ex ante the attack from being perpetrated and not only to punish it ex post. In other words, states are required to assume all the initiatives, including non-legislative ones, which are necessary to protect places of worship, including those measures addressing the root causes of attacks, such as educative programs, measures combating cyber hate, and so on. As I will say, partnerships between public authorities and religious communities are very important, but such partnerships, as well as the initiatives taken by the communities themselves, shouldn't complement and never substitute the role of state and in particular of law enforcement agencies. In the same perspective, also the financial burden on religious communities deriving from the need to adopt and maintain security measures need to be addressed by public authorities in terms of specific public funding or at least tax exemption on expenses made for security measures. With regard to the OSCE activities, in 2019, after a drafting process that took 3 years, and it was also the occasion for making acquaintance with Elisabetta, the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights of the OSCE published a policy guidance on freedom of religion or belief and security. Although this publication was intended to clarify the interrelationship between freedom of religion and security in light of the OSCE Comprehensive Framework for Peace and Security, actually it just addresses the impact of security measures on the enjoyment of freedom of religion or belief. In other words, it considers if and when limitations of freedom of religion or belief motivated by security concerns are legitimate. In general, the Human Rights Department of ODIHR, which is the department covering the portfolio on freedom of religion, has not developed documents or activities on the protection of places of worship. However, the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department, which is the one dealing with hate crimes, in addition to the yearly hate crime reporting I mentioned yesterday, has published 2 guides on addressing the security needs of Jewish and Muslim communities, respectively. The OLC has repeatedly called for a similar guide on addressing the security needs of Christian communities, and we hope that sooner rather than later we will have it. The guides I mentioned indicate some steps that could be taken in developing effective government responses. Acknowledge that security of places of worship of all religious communities is an actual problem, which has a profound impact on communities and believers, raise awareness among different actors, build trust, developing working partnership between public authorities and religious communities, including on risk assessment through line of direct communication and joint planning, improve protection for communities and properties, recognize, record, and prosecute all potential crimes perpetrated against religious properties, in particular recognizing if they are motivated by religious bias, and in case of attack, provide assistance and to the communities and make counter speech in order to express the aversion of public authorities to the attack and the motivation of perpetrators. However, guides remain rather theoretical, while it is essential to develop concrete programs and activities on the ground. And in this respect, SSHR project represents an opportunity to put into practice the guidance I recalled. Let me conclude recalling that in the last OSCE Ministerial Council, an entire paragraph of the statement by Archbishop Gallagher, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Holy See, was devoted to the protection of religious places. And in expressing the great concern of our delegation for the rising number of terrorist attacks, hate crimes, and other manifestations of intolerance targeting persons, places of worship, cemeteries, and religious sites across the OSCE area and beyond, he said, "The fact that many of these acts of violence have been perpetrated against believers when they gather to pray in their places of worship make them particularly heinous. Havens of peace and serenity quickly become execution chambers as defenseless children, women, and men lose their lives simply for gathering to practice their religion." I think that going to a church, to a synagogue, to a mosque, or to another place of worship is not a luxury. Neither can become an act of heroism. It is a fundamental freedom that should be guaranteed to everyone, everywhere. For this reason, I wish to thank again the Conference of European Churches for organizing this event, which is contributing to better understand and lead to appropriate responses in guaranteeing such freedom. Thank you.
Dear Mattia, thank you so much for addressing 2 very important topics that I think we will also continue and after the summer school to discuss and work as Conference of European Churches. And one issue that you brought, it is public funding, and that we need to do some more extensive work for public funding to be ensured for the protection of the worship places from security point of view and the damage which basically is committed by the perpetrators. And the second point that you have brought is something also that we have discussed in the Conference of European Churches, and this is a guide for on Christianity, or the issue addressing the anti-Christian hatred as well in the OSCE area. And also within the SASKE project, we had basically support from our Jewish and Muslim partners to help us in working on this issue in the future. So we will continue for sure to work in this direction. And our last speaker for today is Nicole Wood. Nicole comes from United States, so very good morning to you, Nicole. She's a policy and communication lead in the DHS Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership at U.S. Department of Homeland Security, a center of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. So she has been studying ecology and anthropology, but also theology. So Nicole, warm welcome to you, and we are looking forward learning more about your center's work. How do they relate in their training materials and their work with the churches and religious communities in the US? The floor is yours.
Thank you so kindly. I'm certainly grateful to you, Elizabeth, as well as and all those at the conference of European churches and the Protestant Church in Germany. I'm certainly grateful to present with you all and all the other panelists who've done a tremendous job, and certainly hope what I will share will add to the great work that has already been mentioned by the other panelists. And certainly there's so many common themes from us just across the pond, if you will, in the United States that we're doing. So again, grateful for all of you and grateful for this opportunity to be before you. Again, my name is Nicole Wood, and certainly grateful to express and share some of the work that we're doing very similar that you have seen and witnessed from our other panelists in Europe. Next slide, please. Just to share briefly about who we are in our office, as mentioned by Elizabeth, that we are the DHS, that's the Department of Homeland Security Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. We are within a center that comes out of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, but we reside in the Department of Homeland Security. And just to share that we were established largely because of a major disaster that took place in our country. And several disasters, and recognizing the role the faith community plays, the department recognized it was necessary that we have such an office that could respond to and be alongside those who've been impacted by natural disasters, but also those that are human caused, which is kind of our time that we're here today. And that's a focus, of course, on the safety and security of houses of worship. And in that role, we do a lot of relationship building across all faith traditions and community groups, making sure we'll respond to those needs that they have that are impacted within our department. Next slide. As shared, we are one of 14 centers, just to highlight, within the federal government that do focus on faith-based and community engagement. I won't read all of them, but just to highlight some of them that are here, from the Department of Justice to Health and Human Services, to the environment, to housing needs and education and the like, and the Department of State. We have an extensive reach among our colleagues that we're able to support and stand alongside and servicing faith and community groups. So again, just wanted to highlight that collectively we work together within our departments, but also in support of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Next slide, please. While I know many of you don't need to ask the question, why is it so important that we engage with the faith community? I know that many of you know why. But in the U.S., uniquely, as we know, we are a very faithful country in many regards. As noticed, over 150 million individuals are attending congregations weekly. If we look at even in the U.S. statistically, we have over 345,000 congregations. And when you compare that to schools and universities, as you can see, there's only 105,000 schools and universities. So you can see that the faith community is a very large, but also in comparison to other things that we are certainly in every quarter, if you will, of our nation. Next slide. Just wanted to highlight this piece very quickly because we just had a U.S. Census that just released this data showing that 7 in 10 Americans, that's about 70%, identify as Christians in the U.S. There's also about 25% or so that are unaffiliated or have declined to associate themselves with the religion, which leaves only about 5% of our nation that are other religious community groups. And so just wanted to highlight that just as we're thinking about the individuals who we're serving, but recognizing we serve all faith communities and do so and gladly do so, but just want to give a sense of who we are in the U.S. Next slide. I list all that to share this point, and why is this always important? And so basically about 74% of Americans are affiliated with some sort of religious tradition. And we also know that about 60% of Americans will turn to religious leaders in times of disaster and or what we talk about, those times in which there's a lot of impact that has taken place within their communities, including any kind of human-caused disaster. And we recognize the importance that the faith leaders play. And with that, that's why they are such a crucial partner in the work that we do. Next slide. And we also know that goes without saying why faith leaders are such a crucial part in our lives. They are trusted messengers. They're cultural key holders. They are well networked. And we know that collectively they are providing services to the community when there's times of need. So again, just making the point of why we have such a strong emphasis and focus on the faith community, why we focus on them in particular as it relates to standing alongside, helping to support, and to help to provide services, because we know that they are best connected on the local level in the United States as shared, because we are a very faithful country, but also because we know that through our partnerships, we're able to better serve, and particularly as it relates to the safety and security of houses of worship. Next slide. With all that in our country, it is, I'm sure it's all known that even with those strong relationships we have, we know that the faith community has a lot of vulnerabilities. And as listed here, to be honest, many of these are positive assets. This is what makes faith institutions sacred. It makes them a more welcoming space. And so while one calls them common vulnerabilities, they also are the assets of many of our faith communities. And so while I lift this up because this is part of why when we engage with our faith communities and faith leaders is to help them understand the sacredness of that they in the positive assets they have also are important to assess how can they better think about the better serving that will not compromise the safety and security of those within their house of worship. So just lifting up that, and just as noted here, one area that we are very focused in is around the lack of planning, training, and exercises. And as I continue to share more, that of course will be much more of my focus in our conversation today. But how do we better equip? How do we better equip not just our faith leaders, but its congregants and even the broader community? And the importance of training and the necessity of that as collectively so we all can remain safe. So we recognize some of those vulnerabilities that's outlined here, from having open access to large crowds, publicized events like on social media, which again is an exciting and great thing when we weren't in a COVID environment where everything was virtual right now. But when we are back together more commonly, these are some of the sensitivities that we have to think about. And making sure that we are protecting the safety and security of all those in these publicized events that anyone can openly come to. We've witnessed and seen this unfortunate event in our southern parts of the United States, in South Carolina, at a place called Mother Emanuel AME Church, unfortunately during a prayer service where someone had come in and unfortunately had killed several persons during prayer. We've commonly seen this in other places where people are welcoming individuals during certain times of prayer or other kind of religious traditional holidays, and unfortunately taking advantage of individuals during that time. So again, focusing much more now on how we can be better safe, be more safe, and support those in those times. Next slide. And one way we've done that is the development of this particular guide that we've developed. I'm similar to you all and the good work that's going on, I know, in Europe, and I've actually been taking copious notes over the good work and the things that you all are doing. So we certainly will hear a lot of parallels of our work. So we've developed this guide in helping houses of worship to really develop kind of these high quality emergency operation plan. So in an event of any type of emergency, as I mentioned before, it could be natural and or human caused event. How do we can better assess the needs of your house of worship? How can we better understand the roles of those within the community that can support you in time, recognizing that houses of worship can't do it alone. So we focus a lot on partnership engagement, those private and public partnerships. We spend a lot of time talking about looking at your community assets, looking at those in community who can work, and even looking within your house of worship and those who have skills and talents who can support the safety and security of houses of worship. And in particular, we also are trying to do a better job in supporting around training and education around active shooter incidences. We certainly want individuals to be better prepared in knowing how to respond and not respond out of fear, but respond because they've been trained and well equipped of knowing how to respond, and so that they're making better decisions. And we certainly know that the more we practice, the more we do exercises, the more we do this repetition, will become part of our brains, and we say, you know what, I know how to respond when I see an event that could cause threat to myself, my family, or my community. I know how to actively respond. And so that to me is a place that we're trying to get where we get individuals better trained and educated. So next slide. And then within Sky, not to spend an extensive amount of time, what we do provide are some major steps. It's kind of a really step-by-step process, as noted here, from forming and collaborating planning teams to understanding who should be on that team in your planning, understanding your situations. Many of you have already talked about, and many of the presenters, understanding the threats within your community, and that it's important to understand that. Equally out to determining some of the goals and objectives. What are you trying to obtain from your planning of your operations, especially the security of your house of worship? And then the development stage of that. How do you plan, prepare, and review all those things? And then, of course, how do you implement? So, again, we provide a kind of a step-by-step process, and we certainly have also come alongside and supporting them in that process, and the importance of having these plans in place and that everyone be well-informed in that regard. Next slide. As I've mentioned in the beginning, is the first stage in this planning guide, we talk about the importance of having an emergency operations planning team, and that's how we have formulated. So again, there are key individuals within our communities that we know that are important, that relationships and partnerships be had before the event happens. We have a saying commonly in our work, and that is, it's important to exchange business cards before the events happen. In other words, the first time that you are connected with the local law enforcement and or the fire department shouldn't be at the event that took place because of an active assailant or any kind of mass shooting or any form of violence, being targeted violence to our community. These relationships should already be developed. These relationships should already be had. Every individual should have each other's phone number, and there should be opportunities where you are either practicing in an event something should occur, the things you can do. And so outlined as you hear and around are some of the things that we find to be very important, from, as I mentioned, local law enforcement to the fire department. Though in the U.S. we had an extensive emergency management system and emergency management, in every state that support both, again, natural and human-caused disasters. We have something equally called protective security advisors. Excited to see the same within Europe, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And they do also, similar to what you all have, provide services to community to understand what are the threats that are impacting them? And do they do a lot of looking at what are the vulnerabilities within houses of worship or any other community space? And of course, our Federal Bureau of Investigation is equally important, of course, as it relates to intelligence. So we certainly are connected with them, other associations and denominations. Of course, when we talk about within our faith tradition, we know there are many associations that are associated with our denominations and or related to insurance companies equally, making sure we're protected in the event something should take place. And lastly, of course, are our voluntary organizations. So those are the nonprofits and other organizations that are willing and want to serve alongside houses of worship. So again, this just kind of provides just a sense of what we mean by developing a team and really having those kind of partnerships at every level. So again, from the volunteer level to the law enforcement and everything in between, to really have those relationships prior to events happening, and certainly sharing your plans. And that, to me, the other part is to share with trusted partners what those plans are in the event of an emergency. Next slide. If we want to highlight another incredible resource that we were part of with another department, that again was the Department of Justice. They developed an app on safeguarding houses of worship. It's a mobile app, and again, it helps to develop threat assessments and look at where there are certain vulnerabilities. Again, great opportunity that we can just download, and houses of worship can use this particular tool to do threat assessments. We've done similarly, and I'll share a little more about that later, but just wanted to highlight this incredible resource that has been developed by our partners within the Department of Justice, again, looking at safety and security planning for houses of worship. Next slide. And so in here, again, now within the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security, we also call it CISA. There's also a CISA International as well. So this organization within the Department of Homeland Security helped develop this incredible guide, similar to the Department of Justice, but really a little more detail around how to kind of the guiding principles around protecting strategies. So from identifying who's going to focus on the security of your house of worship. You know, so often we look to pastoral leadership and or the imam or any other faith leader within or the rabbi or others within our faith traditions. But we know that they have enough on their plate, if you will. But we need to identify others who might have law enforcement background or any other security background that can support the coordination. And it's important to identify those individuals, and we do focus on that. And then, of course, as I've mentioned before, around the planning, and I've mentioned some of the guides that we've done, and then some of the safety team. How are we equipping people within the congregation and our community who are better trained, who can better support in times of life-threatening events and or targeted violence? And so within this guide, we've and it's, again, free and available, and I'll share how you can obtain it, from developing your security strategy to this implementation. And so it gives you a kind of a step-by-step approach of understanding how to develop it, understanding the vulnerability assessments that needs to be done, how to protect the facility, and also those houses of worship who have daycares or schools, which is very common in many of our faith institutions here in the U.S., that there are a lot of schools associated with houses of worship, and we certainly want them to be mindful of its impact on its children and things that they can do to protect them, and equally around cybersecurity. So want to be making sure that houses of worship are clear and understand its impact it can have on its congregation. Next slide. Not to go into too much detail, but just to share and highlight a little bit more about this self-assessment. As noted, it will provide you really this kind of easy step-by-step process and suggestions you can make in order to understand how to better design the safety and security of your facility. And as I mentioned here, these are kind of some of the steps, and I've noticed some of these are similar. I know that Andrea also mentioned, but just to highlight here around the security and safety of the emergency management systems, looking at the perimeter, of which that means the outside areas of where the location of of your house of worship, about parking issues, access controls. Sometimes we have to think about the entryway. You know, how easy is it to come in and out? How many doors do you have to allow people to enter and exit? That in itself is a vulnerability, and many of us know that. So, right? So we know the importance of recognizing, do we only need to have certain doors used during times of times when congregants are together? Do we need to focus on those one doors so that we can have better control of who's coming in and out? And so, again, that's a major issue that we sometimes have to lift up. Also, of course, video surveillance, of course, is equally another important area that we want to highlight, and in some of which we do support through our nonprofit security grant program that we have here in the U.S. So we do have a grant program that does support both houses of worship and nonprofits who want and need to seek additional security measures to support houses of worship. And so that equally can include security personnel for this particular grant. So we do spend and certainly want to invest in supporting the safety and security, and we make it a priority, as mentioned, I know several times, recognizing that it is a priority here within our country. Next slide. This is a particular one of my favorites, part of which because where I do attend my house of worship, I do am large part of the both supporting the welcoming those who come in and the security of the house of worship that I'm part of. And so it is so important, this little tool called the power of hello. And we all know the importance of engaging individuals, especially new people who visit us for the first time. And as we know, it's important that we observe who's new. And it's very natural to want to welcome anyone that we know that we haven't seen before. And we know that instantly when we do that, we initiate that initial hello, that initial point, what it does to someone who had an intent to cause harm, what it does is says, we see you, we notice you, how are you? And this is before you even perceive they're doing anything wrong. But what it does to the other individual psychologically is it says, oh, I'm being noticed right now. And what does that mean to their mindset? It's like, oh, it's not that I'm coming in so secretly, if you will. So there is a process, again, of course, in much more detail, when we talk about how do you observe, how do you initiate that hello, in navigating the risk, really assessing, okay, well, is there things about this individual that I should take note of, or things that I think might be a little peculiar that maybe I need to just take note. And if you think it's something, of course, that could cause further harm, how to then obtain help and how to make those calls and or those who are in your security team and or local police in the event if you believe that it's something more harmful than what you observe. So again, we provide those steps, but again, it's just a great way and something that most individuals, certainly who are maybe on the hospitality committee, if you will, can welcome those. And those who are at the door commonly or opening the doors or near the doors can use this technique and has been used and has been very, very helpful. Next slide. Another area where we do a lot of training also is around understanding religious and cultural literacy and competency. We know that sometimes it is so important that while our country may be predominantly of Christian faith, we value and want to uplift all faith traditions. And we know sometimes it's just a matter of how do we better educate others on our different faith cultures and faith traditions. And so, and we've done that in developing a course to help understand and to focus on some of our major faith groups. Know that this is not an exhaustive list. We know that we need to do and develop more. We are planning in that regard, but this is kind of our starting list of some of the faith traditions that we have developed. And it's wonderful one-pagers that you can look at. Just for an example, on those pages, if one had never gone to a mosque before, one may not know to remove their shoes, or as women to cover their hair as a spirit of respect and honor of coming into that particular house of worship. And other traditions may not know that certain faith traditions kneel when they pray. Again, understanding that, or even the names of an imam or a rabbi, or even the particular clothing one should wear when going into any house of worship. So again, we try to kind of give these kind of one-pager cheat sheets, if you will, to support individuals who want to better partner, who want to be better connected in community, and also about protecting and learning about each other. We know that when we better know about each other, I think there's opportunities to create better peace, there's opportunities to create better collaboration, and opportunities where we can decrease any form of targeted violence when we recognize and value just our human existence with one another, our common things with each other. And so for us, we thought it's important that we better educate each other about each other so that we can create more peaceful relationships in community and also partnerships, because we all need to be working collectively together on our safety and security of each other. So next slide. Another exciting one that I do like, and this actually is by far one of the lowest sought after program. It's called You Are the Help Until Help Arrives. It is so important that we kind of give some individuals basic skill sets. In the event that unfortunate events do happen where there is targeted violence and or any other major event that could happen to an individual, how do we give individuals certain skill sets that will support them in knowing how to help, and particularly around life-threatening injuries? We know that it takes time for individuals, especially a first responder, to come on scene. But if there are things that we train and equip certain people to do that they could do to support an individual who's been impacted, we might be able to save lives. And we had found from these trainings that we've done that 98% of the people who took the training, that they are more likely as a result of what they've learned to be more engaged in supporting someone. So in other words, sometimes people will see people who have been injured and out of fear, they don't want to do anything. This training hopefully helps to kind of to combat that fear, to know that, no, you've been trained on certain skill sets that you can use that won't cause harm, but actually will help until a first responder, that is either law enforcement and or any form of the emergency management system, can come and support an individual who's been impacted. So again, an incredible resource that we've trained and has been, again, a real asset to our community. Next slide. And just to highlight more about it, again, it gives kind of 5 major steps to help save lives. Again, as I mentioned before, what's very basic is around calling 911. We know that of course, is a first step. But again, how do you stay safe? Protecting the injured from harm or moving away from ongoing danger, which of course is very important. How do you stop the bleeding? Again, we have a whole program, another training that does focusing on stopping the bleed, how to apply from direct pressure in an area where that needs to be protected. So again, another important skill set just to have. How to position those who are injured. Again, very important. Sometimes we might think it's, how to do one way, but really it gives you the tools and say, no, when an individual has been injured in a particular way, these are things you can use to help protect them if they should be hurt. And of course, around providing comfort to the injured. And of course, that is another area of importance. Next slide. They also have continued training. Won't go into degree down here, but we also use, again, these are all online. You can use interactive training where it makes it, I guess, a little bit more fun. How to make life-saving decisions within an amusement park. There's web-based trainings that they're offering, and we also offer some instructor-led training. So again, we do a lot of, again, we're around this area, and just the importance of making sure that we're making decisions to help to support individuals in the event they have been impacted by a targeted violence and or other form of violence or life-threatening event. Next slide. We just wanted to highlight this particular guide, again, developed by our colleagues at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security on mitigating attacks. It's so important to remember, how do we prevent, again, the impacts the impacts on houses of worship, and how do we develop a security framework that can be tailored for houses of worship, no matter the size or the denomination, and we know the importance of that. And so, yet again, we've did an extensive amount of research looking at targeted violence against houses of worship over a 10-year period, and as a result of that, we've developed these guidelines to hopefully support houses of worship in their planning and consideration. So again, just another tool that we use in support for houses of worship. Next slide. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about this and are very aware of this. See something or say something. Again, this is very much ingrained into the hearts and minds of all of us in the Department of Homeland Security. We're over 200,000 employees. We're probably one of the third largest agencies within the U.S. government. And I will tell you, this is something that we take very seriously. So if we're seeing danger, if we see harm, it is important that we respond accordingly. So if you're a trained professional, clearly we would hope that you would stand in the gap of those in need. But also if you're not, how to report and call events that we find in our communities, in public spaces, and or in houses of worship. So it's not just limited, of course, to buildings. We know in public spaces as well, the importance of that as well. So just wanted to highlight a major campaign that we do focus on and continue to focus on within our agency. Next slide. I also just wanted to highlight this another incredible program we have called the Community Emergency Response Team. We also call it a CERT. Similar to what I did hear from our other colleagues talking about the importance of having individuals who are trained and who have expertise around all forms of disasters, all forms of events that could impact the safety and security of one's community, right? And so we've developed these type of training. So we have over 2,700 CERT programs throughout the United States and have trained over 600,000 volunteers. So again, this is a volunteer base. It can be any individual who wants to be trained in their community. And then they can help and best respond during emergencies or events within their communities, their cities, within urban areas and rural areas. They've been trained and equipped to best support and serve in those places. So a great asset and a great training that we really value and recommend. Next slide. And as I'm wrapping up, I just wanted to lift up, I know in Europe, you equally have protective security advisors, also through our cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. We do, I will tell you, they are an invaluable asset to our community. They are free and available to the community. They provide a tremendous amount of support to state and local partners. As I mentioned before, they provide threat assessments. They provide exercises, as I mentioned, the importance of exercising, right? This idea of doing things over and over again to make sure that it becomes part of our memory that we need to focus on so that we're not fearful when events happen, but we're able to act in making good decisions that support the life, potentially life-threatening events. So they do a lot of work in that area. And of course, around the training, again, around run, hide, and fight, recognizing suspicious activities, as well as bombing prevention. So we do have, they're located in all states and are providing support. Another area that they do support, I'm just wanting to highlight, for example, we know that we're coming up in the month of September. There are about 6 major Jewish holidays. We've received numerous calls from them, the Jewish community, about some of their safety concerns. And so it's just an opportunity for our protective security advisors to come alongside those communities to help provide resources and support around security measures they can provide. And so again, that to me is another great asset that we have within the department that we can lend to the faith community, and particularly when they are a sense of increased threat and or they're seeking particular guidance on how to be more safe and secure. I want to honor our time. I know we're running a little later, but again, I want to thank everyone. I welcome any Q&As that we have. Next slide. And then, of course, for any resources that we have, you can go to the next slide. We welcome to support. Again, I just want to thank the opportunity to be here. I want to thank, again, all the planning, those of the Conference of European Churches for the opportunity to be here. But equally, I neglected to mention our thoughts and prayers are certainly with those in Germany who have been impacted by the floods. And those, of course, who are still missing. So I did neglect to mention that, but I did want to acknowledge that we are certainly keeping that in our thoughts in this time, and those who have been impacted in Germany. So again, thank you for our time. Thank you for this opportunity, and welcome to the questions.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for this very extensive presentation. I mean, I have learned a lot about the new resources and how better to respond to the security threats, challenges, and risks from your experience. So our thematic group on human rights will look into the materials that you have been presented and the resources as well, and we will use them for sure once we start organizing our training sessions after September, as Ophir have mentioned, whether the training for trainers is done. So I can just see that still the number of speakers and participants is still stable, even though we have been prolonging for now half an hour, and apologies for that, but the content was so good and so well presented that it was pity basically to speed it up, because it is really very useful material and it contributes to the continuation and implementation of the SASCI project. So just to do justice to our speakers and to participants, there are several questions in the chat, and I promise we finished at 4 p.m. So the first question is in terms of approval of the budget for the protection of the worship places. The question is how these budgets were allocated to these 5 specific projects, and I guess this is the question for Andrea. And another question for Andrea is how these projects, I mean, what do they have in common, and how do we make sure that there is not overlap in all the projects which were selected by the European Commission? And the question for Ophir about the videos. So we, in the video, hide, run, and report. What about warning for other people? And one thing that we have discussed in our thematic group on human rights, and that is this emergency number. Is the emergency number 112 the same for all countries in Europe? So much on the question side. So, Andrea?
Yes, so I've unmuted myself. So as to the questions, very valid questions. So first, regarding the budget, the procedure, how a budget is allocated to projects is the procedure in general for calls for project proposals in the European Commission. So you have a call fiche, and in the call fiche, the priorities are listed and the expected outcomes, and so in general, like what is expected of the project proposals to be handed in. And then the applicants, they hand in a very detailed proposal for the project with the budget already allocated. So they describe the actions and the expected outcomes, and they include an estimation of the budget. And if the project is chosen, so if in the evaluation process, the project is among the beneficiaries, then the budget is allocated according to the budget forecast that the project has handed in, or that the applicants have handed in. And this is this. And the next question was, how do we ensure that there is no overlap? And one thing that I have mentioned already earlier in my presentation is that at a very early stage, so a couple of months back when the projects were starting, we have held a conference with presentations from all the projects, and to which also served the purpose of putting the coordinators in contact. So basically, this conference was twofold, with a twofold objective. There was a morning session with a public part about the projects, and an afternoon session exclusively for the project coordinators to discuss exactly these questions. Where are overlaps? Where can we work together? Because of course it's in our shared interest not to duplicate, but to make the best out of synergies. And And I also really appreciate this session here, and many thanks to my fellow presenters. And yes, Nicole, I have seen that like lots of the work strands that we are working on are very similar. So this is really, really interesting. And I think the contact is really valuable, like in your direction as well. And then like I can also answer another question regarding the 112 emergency number. So this is actually an EU-wide initiative. So the 112 number is an emergency number in all EU member states. And so with this emergency number, you always reach the emergency services. Thanks a lot.
Ophir, over to you about other people informing. How do we deal with that?
Yes, I would like to first to mention that, like I mentioned before, and like Nicole mentioned also, like Andreas said, there is a similarity between Europe to the States, and there are many things in common. What we saw in the last years that nearly all the attack happened against the soft targets, a public place and place of worship, and I would like to mention too that 90% from the attack, nearly 90%, is stopped by a civilian, not by law enforcement, because they happened most of them in the street, and the first people who came were closer to the attack were civilian people. And so that's why it's very important and crucial today to increase the security awareness of all our citizens, because the problem can happen everywhere, not only close or in our building. We are going, beside our training that we are going to use our videos, the 10 videos. Our goal also to see how we can share it with the maximum people, and maximum people can see the video. And our idea is to see how we can share it in the social media, and like that everybody, it can be open for everybody, and everybody can see it. All that beside our job with the place of worship and the school, etc. So I think it's important about the emergency number. Andrea already answered. If there's some country that the number is not the same, so we are ready to change the video and to make something to adapt the number to the relevant country.
Okay, thank you so much.
One thing I would like to ask Nicole. If it's possible, Elisabetta.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Nicole, you mentioned and I like your presentation. Thank you very much for your presentation. I like it very much. And I would like to ask you, if you when you are saying we are afraid all the time and you have to take responsibility, and you are mentioned that in your presentation that you ask people to help, that you ask them to help, and if something happened, to help, and you are not. I don't know how it's working in USA, but you are not afraid from responsibility that maybe somebody can attack you, or somebody can ask you after if something happened, or I don't know.
Yes, and I think that's part of one of our training. You're to help arrive. And it is important that we train individuals when they can, and we recognize every individual is different. And particularly if you've been traumatically impacted by certain events, especially life-threatening events, you may not be as reticent to want to help. But there's some people whom we know have been healed through those issues and or been trained, and they know that given a circumstance and they see an individual who's hurt, that they're able to step in and support until a trained professional can come. And so what we found is that sometimes getting people tools, some basic tool sets to support, in the event there is a life-threatening event and someone who's a medical professional is not able to get there immediately, right? So how do we get people enough tools to keep that individual alive and or from bleeding and or from suffocating or whatever the situation is until a medical professional can come? And sometimes these basic skill sets can, of course, save lives. And so that's part of what we've tried to do for those who want to take the training and feel equipped to better serve. And again, these are everyday citizens.
Thank you.
Well, it is time to say goodbye for today. Thank you so much to all of you for participating in this webinar. Thank you, Andrea, Ophir, Mattia, and Nicole for being with us in the middle of the holiday season, and to all the participants who have been listening this webinar very carefully and engaging with us with their questions and comments.